All right, so today's class is don't stress about stress. And if you're like most people, when you tell someone not to stress, or you tell someone not to worry, or you tell someone to just relax, that's probably the exact opposite reaction that we actually have. And so, feel free to not answer questions. Sometimes in a public setting like this, we don't want to always, put things in the chat or ask certain questions, but I will give you an opportunity to ask those questions that you might have. I'll also will give you my contact information because sometimes we have questions after we've had time to digest and process what we've learned. And so today we're going to talk about some things that are probably just going to be reminders for you, but hopefully you'll walk away with just a nugget or something that was inspirational to help you improve how you're managing your stress. So if you're feeling stressed, feel free to put that in the chat. If there's a certain question about stress that you might have, feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat. My name is Abby Horton, and I am an assistant professor in the Capstone College of Nursing here at UA. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a certified health and life coach. I am a Well-Being ambassador for the Honors College where I teach part-time, and I am your wellness class educator. My contact information is my email here, abby.horton@ua.edu. And if you have questions or just want to reach out, please feel free to do so. So we're going to try to take time to relax over this next hour together. And, again, if you have any questions or you have topics that you were hoping to see me cover today, definitely put them in the chat because I want to make sure that this is meaningful for y'all. So I start most of my presentations when we talk about health or we talk about wellness or stress with this graphic, because so often our stress comes from the fact that we try to control things that aren't really meant to be within our control. So sometimes we have things that are within our control, sometimes we don't, and we really have to take time to recognize when that is. So the goal is not to be completely stress-free. I always joke and say that totally stress-free is a playlist on Spotify, but it is not true to life. We're going to have stress, but we often talk about stress as if we shouldn't have any. So it's not the goal to get rid of all of our negative thoughts and feelings. Our real goal is really to change how we respond to our stress and how we respond to the feelings that we have. So we're going to not worry about what we can't control, but we're really going to focus on the things that we can control. So in this third graphic, it basically comes down to our attitude and our effort, and what we do, how we take action. So think about your attitude, your actions, your behavior, what you eat, what you don't eat, who you follow, who you don't follow. That's especially true in those last, couple of years with the pandemic, and now with the recent events going on in the world. I would be remiss not to mention all of the geopolitical concerns that are going on, and then there's just the regular everyday life stressors that we have, the email that's in the background. So I would really encourage you, especially if you're eating your lunch with us while you're on your lunch break, I would encourage you to close your Outlook so that you don't hear that dinging in the background. That can be a huge stressor for people. And think about the boundaries that you set. One boundary might be that you take a dedicated lunch. We have a dedicated lunch hour, but so many of us just eat at our desk, or we only take, a few minutes of that time. But I encourage you to really take your breaks, take your lunches, because you're going to need that energy. And oftentimes you think that you're being more productive by, working through lunch or not taking a break, but often if you'll come back to something after you've had a break, after you've had time away from your desk, you come back more energized and you're more productive. So think about that. And then this last image, if you've been on calls before with this graphic particularly, I love a Venn diagram. And I think it's important because it helps you visually see where the things that matter overlap with the things that you can control. And that's really where you should focus your time and attention, because there are things that we can control in life that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And there are things that matter that are super important and meaningful to us that we have no control over, or very little control over. So think about that as we move forward. Some of the things that we're going to talk about is how stress affects our personal well-being, how we have to learn the difference between stress and anxiety, how we can develop effective coping strategies, which is going to be most of what I talk about, how we really look and assess for stress and ineffective coping within ourselves, and how we can really implement and evaluate if our stress management, if our coping strategies are helping to alleviate our stress. So we're going to try to enter this stress-free zone. Y'all know what stress is. You know when you feel stress. It's immediately recognizable. We might all feel it differently, but we all know what that sensation feels like when you're starting to feel the stress creep in. And usually I will have a stressful moment or a stressful event right before I teach on stress and wellness. Because, I think it's the universe's way of reminding me that I'm not immune to this, and none of us are. We're all humans. So it's been a stressful couple of days for me, and I'm glad about that, because I never want to get to the point where I feel like I've moved beyond the things that I teach. Because it truly is waking up every day and deciding that you're going to manage your stress well. So stress is just really a state of mental or emotional strain. It might be tension that results from adverse or very demanding circumstances. And the thing about stress is it's usually this feeling that you don't have the tools or resources or the skills and abilities necessary to meet that demand. So it feels like you're not capable of meeting the stress that you have. And I think that's really important. So that's also why we sometimes see people who have very stressful lives manage it really well, because they have built up the skills, the tools, the resources, the resilience to be able to cope with that level of stress. So what stresses me out may not be stressful to someone else. And so I think that's important. It's very individual. Stress can be any of these disturbances in our normal process, just in our normal balance, that equilibrium that we talk about sometimes. And stressors can be any stimuli that's perceived as a challenge or even as an emotional threat. So you can have this acutely or chronically. So you can have chronic stress that goes on for a while. The pandemic is a great example of chronic stress. It really has been something that's been ongoing that we initially thought was acute. These last events in the last week with Ukraine has been an acute stressor. For those of us who are not currently in that situation, it would be considered acute because we haven't had prior, exposure experience. But we can also see things like post-traumatic stress disorder or complex grieving. Those are things that happen when over time, especially if it's been a really traumatic life event, or it was something that you experienced as a childhood that caused a stress response for a prolonged period of time, you can actually develop a post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. And we often think about that as, being associated with veterans who've seen combat or sexual assault, survivors. But that is also something that can happen to really many of us, and especially children. We always tell people, and we always commonly say that children are really resilient. And that's something that I'm hoping to change the narrative around, because children are really resilient in the moment. But if you think about how many people as adults have difficulties with adapting to stress, and who have difficulties with eating disorders, or mental health challenges or things like that, it could be that children are really just very delayed in their response and having to process that as an adult. And so, yes, children are resilient. They do bounce back, but I think it's important to really take that a step further and look at how layered that can be, because we oftentimes are stressed in our current lives, and it's really about something we've already experienced before. So if you're someone who has chronic stress, and it's more than just kind of the everyday, I'm just too busy and I'm trying to manage a lot on my plate. If you have chronic ongoing stress, or you have big reactions to stress that shouldn't, in your mind, be as upsetting as it is to you, it may be because there's something underlying there. So you can have internal factors, external factors, developmental or situational factors of stress. So internal would be things like illness or anxiety, or just being nervous or being uncertain. That's certainly is something to consider. External, it could be that you've lost someone. There's been a natural disaster, and there's been, wars or conflicts or crises or things like that. Developmental, it could be that you're, beginning something new, that you're adjusting to aging parents, that you have a new job, a new developmental milestone in your lives or in the lives of your family members. And then situational, it could be things like, again, situational external can cross over, but it could be things like, an accident, a crash, or a natural disaster, or maybe you're having some type of conflict, especially with work, because that is part of our security. And then illness also can be situational. So there is overlap among these. So it's important to really understand where your stressors are coming from. And most likely they're coming from a lot of different places. Some are going to be developmental, some are going to be situational, some are going to be internal, and some are going to be external. And all of those are going to impact you differently depending on your life experiences and the things that you value, the things that cause stress for you are going to be very much about how you view that and how you process that and what your life has been like before. So again, it's important that you think about not moralizing stress as good or bad, but really thinking about how can you positively impact the amount of stress that you have. So stress is actually neutral. It's actually necessary. We often think about it as being good or bad, like I said, but we really need stress in our lives. It's the body's automatic response to a physical or mental demand that's placed on it. So our stress response is actually helpful. It helps get us ready to face the stress that we have in our lives. And that can be good stress in air quotes, or that can be not so great stress. So our adrenaline and our cortisol are hormone responses to stress. So that feeling that you get when you get an email that says you have an upcoming deadline, that feeling that you get when you see that email is probably your cortisol being released. And y'all know what that feels like. Adrenaline and cortisol together, I think, feels like when you're about to slam on your brakes in traffic to avoid hitting the person in front of you. We probably all have experienced that sensation. That is the flood that you feel of hormones when you're trying to make sure that you don't hit someone or cause a wreck. And so those hormones are going to be things that to a lesser degree are elicited every time that we identify as being stressed, or every time we encounter something that feels stressful to us, whether it's a mental or physical stress response to a stressor, or whether it's something that we're just thinking about. And a lot of times our stress comes from the fact that we like to ruminate. We like to think again and again about how something happened, or how something wasn't helpful, or how something was stressful, and that's called rumination. And every time we think of that memory, we're eliciting a stress response. It may not be the slamming on the brakes stress response, but it's still a stress response, and it still takes a toll on our body mentally and physically. So when we do feel stressed, we have this fight or flight response, which is so common. And this is the saber-toothed tiger example that you get when you learn about stress in the medical world. It's the image of a prehistoric person who's, got a, kind of a club in their hand, and there's a saber-toothed tiger in front of them. You've all probably seen the images in textbooks. And the saber-toothed tiger is coming at the person, and the person has to decide if they're going to fight the tiger or if they're going to flee, if they're going to run away from the tiger. But what I see more often now is people freezing. And the freeze response is a very valid response to stress, because you could, when you see that saber-toothed tiger or that email or, that deadline or that, stressful experience, you could just freeze and not know what to do. You don't run, you don't fight, you don't do anything. You just freeze in the spot. And that's what I see more and more people doing, not only my patients and my clients, but also my students and my friends, and just, people out in the community. You see people staying still, staying stuck, and saying, I don't know what to do. I feel overwhelmed. I feel like I'm not sure what's next. I feel stuck. When you see and hear that kind of language, it means that they're probably having a freeze response to stress, because they aren't really sure what to do. So I want you to take note of that. There are 9 to 12 different responses that we can have to stress, and we usually really only talk about 2, the fight or the flight response. Ironically, they all start with F. So all 9 to 12 responses that you can identify actually start with F. So it's easy for you to identify those and remember those. But these are the 3 I think that are the most common and the most important to talk about. So stress has positive and negative impacts and effects on our mental and physical well-being. And it's important for us to see the impact of that, because oftentimes we need to have a moment where we're completely flooded and overwhelmed before we're willing to make changes. And so it's that moment where you feel like you're hitting rock bottom. Sometimes you have to do that to make change. And I know, even though I study this is part of my research, I still have to hit rock bottom sometimes. I still have to overload my plate sometimes to be able to say, okay, I probably need to reassess how I'm responding to the stress, but also what is the cause of the stress. So moderate levels of stress may actually improve your performance and your efficiency. And it's this notion, and I'll use a student example since we're in higher education. If your students, or if you as a student never got concerned or got, stressed about taking a test, then you probably wouldn't have studied and prepared as much as you did. But that concern that you, aren't going to do well, or that you're going to not pass that test, makes you want to study. It gives you that external motivation to study. And it's the same thing with any other stressor, a performance that we're going to go do, a speech that we're going to go deliver, a report that we've got to turn in for work. Whatever it is, we wouldn't do the level of work that we typically do if we weren't stressed a little bit about it. So that's the idea, that it will improve our performance and efficiency if we don't let it get to that paralyzing level of stress. So I think it's important, once you have this background, and you probably already knew most of that, really to start to look at your triggers. So what are the things that happen that trigger your stress? So for all of this is going to be, different for us on the call, because we all are going to have different stressors. But I'll give an example. I have young children, and dinner time is always a challenge, just to make sure that everyone gets fed and everyone is, getting taken care of. And it's usually a busy time. You're just getting home from work and you're having to get kids to different activities and homework and all of that. And so usually, the dog is barking, the doorbell's ringing, the house phone and cell phone are ringing, kids are running around, there's something that needs attention on the stove top, and it's just chaos, right? And then eventually, at least in my household, something falls on the floor, whether it breaks or not, something gets spilled. And so, it's just chaos, right? And you're already tired, and it's already one of those moments where there's just stress going on. And so for me, if I were to break this down looking at individual triggers, my triggers would be: the phone rings, the dog barks, a kid spills something, something's burning on the oven. We're under a time crunch because we've got to get to the next activity or the next thing, right? Or you're just tired. Maybe you're just tired after the end of the day. And so those are some of the triggers. So once you identify those, because so often what we say is to our best friends or anyone who will listen, dinner time is so stressful. And then they ask you why, and you're like, well, because it just is not dinner time stressful for everyone. But if you can identify the specific things that are stressful, then that's when you can start to take action. So I can't do anything about the feeling of it being stressful at dinner time if I don't know what's causing that. So for me, turning my ringer off of my cell phone seems obvious and simple, but when we're stressed, we don't do the obvious and simple things. And so turn your cell phone, ringer off if that's a stressor. For me, having the ringer off on my house phone during that time eliminated a ton of stress. Letting the dog go outside into the yard while dinner's getting, on the table, or maybe putting him in the kennel, total game changer, because the dog is not underfoot while you're trying to fix dinner. Doorbells, you can't always help doorbells ringing, but having someone to answer the door. So we had a kid designated for, if the door rings, you're the person who goes and answers the door. Or if here's someone who's going to set the table, or whatever it is. So having really specific action to take, so that when you do have this stressor, Sometimes you can't always eliminate or avoid the stressor, but you need to have a plan to actually manage that. And if you can assign someone to do that, that's so good. Now, there are times where you have younger children or you have aging parents, or maybe it's just you and there is no one to delegate to. I'm going to talk more about that too, because there have been moments where, all of my children were little and it was just me and there was no one to delegate to. And that can feel really isolating. So we'll talk more about that. Explore self-care and stress management. But when I say explore stress and self-care, I don't mean that as a band-aid solution. We are not promoting toxic positivity where you just think positive and you will be positive. There is really important work around mindset, and that is very important, very meaningful. But glossing over the fact that your life is really stressful is not going to be helpful in the long run. You do need to have a positive mindset, but not to the detriment of, everything is positive all the time. One of those, popular sayings that are on pillows and pencils and t-shirts are, you'll see very commonly positive vibes only. And that is not going to be something I ever purchase, because, my stance on that is all vibes are welcome, because you're not going to be positive 24/7. And if you are, I would be concerned, because it means you're not dealing with the things that are going on in your life, because everyone's life is just not that happy all the time, not 24/7. So think about self-care as a way to really truly take care of yourself, not, a bath bomb and chocolate. That's not self-care. That you can't do that every day and sustain that. So it's important to treat yourself and do those kinds of things, but you really want to get to a point where your life is not something that you're trying to escape from. So when you identify your stressors and then identify your triggers and how you're going to respond to those, then you need to really think about, okay, what is my actual response going to be? When that plate falls, or that drink gets spilled, or that dog barks, or that phone rings, how am I actually going to respond? And a lot of times we'll yell, or we'll scream, or we'll get frustrated, or we'll, kind of storm off, or we'll just get overwhelmed. We might cry. Those are all typical stress response reactions. But that's probably not how you want to respond every time you get stressed. And if that is how you respond, it means that you're just completely flooded emotionally and completely taxed. So you need to give yourself a break and think about how you can move forward from a place of not having to have those automatic reactions. Because a lot of times, if you're overwhelmed, physically, mentally, emotionally, you feel like you don't have control of those responses and you do automatically react. And we want to get you to the point where you can pause and you can decide how you want to act. And that might be crying, right? But it might be something else more helpful in the moment. And tears are good. Tears are good things. So responses to stress, these are all of the physiological things that you start to see as someone gets stressed. And y'all have felt this before. Like I said, I'm sure all of us have had to slam on the brakes to avoid a crash at some point. So when you think about physiological responses to stress versus psychological responses, psychologically, we can have anxiety and fear. A lot of us get angry, and people don't realize that that is a response to stress. Some people will get more depressed and withdrawn. Again, it's very individual based on your upbringing, your core values, your life experiences. And so just remember that everyone's not going to respond to stress the way that you do. And you may vary depending on what types of stress or just where you are in your life, right? Depending on the different factors that are going on. So the physiological responses to stress are going to be immediately, you're going to have the fight or flight, or maybe even the freeze response. And then over the long term, you're going to start having prolonged periods of cortisol release, which is what's associated with, diabetes and metabolic syndrome and all sorts of health issues that you can have. And then the freeze response is something that if it is prolonged, usually it's an acute response, but if you see that you're chronically in a freeze response, this is where people can start to really get depressed and overwhelmed and can start having a lot of signs and symptoms of health issues. So approaches to stress management, you can alter the stressor like I mentioned. you can try to adapt to the stressor, or you can try to avoid the stressor. So in my example, I was doing a little bit of all three at the dinner time hour. So altering the stressor. Altering the stressor looked like assigning people to different roles and responsibilities to be able to help. Adapting to the stressor was really about, okay, this is what I'm going to do if this happens or when this happens, right? Because it's not a matter of, is something going to interrupt you? Is that a possibility? In our day and time, our lives are very much interrupted on a daily basis. So you're going to experience these disruptions and interruptions and stressors. So how are you going to adapt to those? And then avoiding the stressor. That is preferable for a lot of instances, but it's not always possible. So if you can avoid the stressor, then sure. If you know that there's a particularly congested road on your way home from work and you can take a more peaceful route home and it just takes a couple of minutes longer, then by all means avoid the stressor. But sometimes you have to take the most direct route. So if you do have to go down the road that's a little more congested with traffic or a little more stressful for you, think about how you can alter or adapt. Maybe it's that you get your favorite coffee on the way home, or that you listen to music. So there are definitely different approaches to stress management, and you get to choose what works best for you in the moment. So when you adapt to stress, it's all about coping and resourcefulness and resilience. So when you think about using what you have to really kind of combat the stress, is those strategies that you use to manage those demands. That's coping. And then resourcefulness is really looking for ways to overcome your difficulties. And resourcefulness is in practice what we just walked through with the example. How can I make this situation that I can't change different or better or work for me in a way that is sustainable? That's being resourceful. And then resilience, we often think about as the capacity to bounce back from challenges and adversity and just different difficulties. Resilience is also a little bit more nuanced than that. There's more to resilience than just bouncing back. We are not a bouncy ball. That's how resilience is normally, kind of pictured as a bouncy ball that just bounces back anytime something happens. But resilience is really more about sustained mindset around, even though this is challenging, I'm going to be okay. And you continue to exercise that muscle. And unfortunately, in order to build resilience, you really have to go through difficulties and challenges, because resilience is like a muscle in the sense that in order for it to get bigger and stronger, you have to work it. And in order to work your resilience, you have to experience those challenges where you have to be resilient. So resilience is not really a course that you take or, a competency that you can meet. Unfortunately, it's just your lived experience of you continually showing up, even though you've had challenges and setbacks. So to manage your stress, when you can do it well, you'll have so many benefits. Your physical health will typically improve. You'll have more energy and stamina, which is going to help you manage your stress even better. And that is just one of those cyclical effects that, if you've ever done my habit change talk, it's the power of the cycle. Once you kind of get in that cycle of, I feel more energy, so then I can respond better to stress, so then I can feel more energy. That's a great cycle to get into. Unfortunately, when you get in that cycle in the reverse, where you lose energy and then you respond less well to stress, that's also a difficult cycle to break. So if you can get in the cycle where it's really building momentum and energy and stamina, then that's the cycle that you want to try to maintain. For your emotions, they start to stabilize. You generally feel more positive and happier and more hopeful, and your focus improves. So a lot of people are talking about adult, ADHD or ADD onset. And so many times I think it's hard, because when you're in this period, especially, people who are on the call who are in a higher education environment where there's a lot going on and you probably have a lot of responsibilities personally and professionally, you can feel pulled and you can lose focus and have difficulty concentrating simply because you're stressed and because you have a lot on your plate. And so I often say, is it really that you have, attention deficit, a new onset of that, or is it that you really are just pulled in so many different directions that it feels very symptomatic of that. And I think that's a hard one. That's something that you would want to work with a clinician or a healthcare provider to be able to kind of figure that one out. But a lot of times people do come to me and talk to me about their lack of focus and how difficult that is. Because again, once you lose focus and concentration and energy, any stressors that you have, even if they're pretty simple, are going to feel pretty monumental and difficult and challenging for you. So things that you can do to manage your stress. I think it always starts with, the basics. So if you've done the wellness basics class, that's a good one to reference, because if you're not sleeping well, if you're not hydrating well, if you're not eating well, if you're not taking breaks and doing things like mindfulness and meditation, if you're not moving your body, even if that's not formal exercise, then it's going to be difficult for you to manage your stress. And so if you can start to make a couple of changes with your health promotion activities, I would say increase your water intake to start, because that's what you have the most control over. And then start working on your nutrition and your sleep. Start walking, even if it's just for 10 minutes a day. And start really thinking about building in intentional breaks throughout the day, 5, 10, or 15 minutes, 2 to 3 times a day, maybe morning, noon, and after work in the evening. Those are going to be really important to give yourself time to just relax and disconnect. So close your eyes, maybe listen to some soothing music, but it's not a time to, watch TV or scroll social media or call someone. You don't want that extra stimulation. You really want to do things that give yourself a break. Managing your time is something that I think is important. We talk about that often when we talk about stress, but so often we are trying to put more in our day than we can reasonably accomplish. So build in margin. When you work in higher education, there are going to be things about your day that you can't predict. And we work regardless of your role, whether you're faculty or staff. It doesn't matter what your title is. You're interacting and interfacing with a lot of people. And so there are going to be emails that came up that require you to do something that you didn't anticipate. There are going to be interruptions that you could not have foreseen when you started your workday. And so there are going to be those unscheduled things that come up that maybe they're not a crisis or an emergency, but they're just things that you can't plan for. So if you block out your time, try to block out time for meetings to end before the end of the hour. We're in a habit, I think, of, and this is our culture, of having 1-hour meetings. I would really challenge you to see if you can start having 30-minute meetings, because that keeps you on task. And if you can have 30-minute meetings instead of hour-long meetings, and certainly like faculty meetings, staff meetings, those are going to go longer. They're going to be an hour or 2 hours long. And that's just part of what our work environment is like. And it's necessary because there's a lot to discuss. But if you're working on a project, if you're working on, something that is smaller scale, try 30-minute meetings. And if you struggle to get things done in an hour, then definitely try the 30-minute meeting, because I like to talk. Those of you who may know me know that I like to talk. But having that deadline of 30 minutes gives you a sense of urgency that you need to get that work done. So time management is not all about, just getting your time scheduled better. It's about using the time that you have in a more strategic way. So I recommend the 30-minute meetings. I recommend having 10 minutes in every hour to give yourself time to really have margin. So if you schedule things at 9 and then at 10, even if you're on a Zoom call, that's not enough time for you to actually make that transition, right? Because you need to have time to be able to answer your phone. You need to be able to have time to go to the restroom, get some water. You need to be able to have time to just, sit for a second before you go to your next thing. Again, it feels like when you start to do some of these things that you're going to be losing time, but you likely will start to gain time back and gain productivity back, even if you don't get time back. Avoiding maladaptive behaviors. So sometimes we cope with things, but we're not coping with them in a healthy way. So this would be something like binge eating or binge drinking or treating yourself all the time. So those can be maladaptive coping behaviors, and you just want to take note of them. Now, I'll give you an example. There are going to be times where I'm very stressed and I'm going to go treat myself to my favorite coffee or Coke. Even though I don't do that every day, it's something that there are going to be those times where I know that I just, on a Friday afternoon, I'm going to go and get my favorite coffee or Coke because that's my reward for, making it through a challenge, or it's a treat for starting the weekend. And I think those things are okay as long as you're intentionally doing them and you're not doing them just out of habit that you haven't thought about. Stress management techniques could be things like relaxation techniques, meditation, visualization. So, a lot of imagery. When people tell you go to your happy place, for me, my happy place is the beach. So, they'll say, close your eyes and imagine yourself in your happy place. And so, you're supposed to imagine yourself, on a beach or in a mountain or, whatever it is for you. That can be really helpful when you're taking your brain breaks. Biofeedback, there's some therapies and techniques that you can do there. Acupuncture, seeing a chiropractor for adjustments, massage therapy, reflexology, and then just things like enjoying life, laughing, having humor, enjoying music and art and dance and the outdoors, being out in nature, journaling, things like gentle movement, walking, yoga, swimming. Those are all going to be things that help with stress management. So creating awareness around when you need support and when you need help is important because, sometimes we do need more formal support. Maybe we have had ongoing stressors or losses or things that really we need to walk through that with a professional, either a healthcare provider or a counselor. And so certainly think about that, but just challenge the negative beliefs that you sometimes have. When you start to say should, I should be here, I should have done that. When you say should, always challenge that because it's giving you this sense of you didn't do something that was needed to be done. And really, it may not be true. So always ask yourself when you say, or someone says to you, you should have something, then question the truth of that. Is that really true? Probably not. Pursue a positive mindset. I'm going to show you a technique for that. Practice self-care, like I mentioned, and that's not just the chocolate and the bath bombs. Manage your stress from a proactive stance. Really prioritize what's important to you based on what your job responsibilities are in your professional life and what your personal core values are in your personal life. And then be flexible because you can't predict the future. So you can plan your day out, but you don't know if that's exactly how the day is going to go. And being flexible is such a huge part of having a positive mindset and dealing with stress when you actually have those stressors that you can't predict or control. And I think it's really important when you're thinking about cultivating a calm response to stress, is just to acknowledge your feelings. In positive psychology, which is not the same thing as toxic positivity, people will say, to feel your feelings. And so oftentimes in Western culture, we don't allow ourselves to feel feelings. We might allow ourselves to feel joy or happiness, and we might allow ourselves to feel anger or frustration. But the other spectrum of feelings, we often don't show those as much. We tend to mask those. And when we stuff our feelings down without acknowledging them, we often will see things like health concerns or chronic stress or just things, that you wouldn't expect to happen from just not processing your emotions. And our bodies are really good about giving us, the bells and whistles and red flags when we're not taking care of ourselves. But we're so accustomed to not listening to our bodies that we don't often catch it until we're very, very sick or very, very stressed or very, very tired. And I say that as someone who is really good at ignoring those sometimes. I have to be very mindful of that. I think it's important to stay informed, but to take breaks from the news, to take breaks from social media. Our bodies and our brains and our nervous system is really not designed to take in that much, in the form of setting news. And, it's important to be informed, but to balance that out with breaks and to, really cultivate who you're getting your news sources from so that you're not bombarded with all of this conflicting information and having to process that. I think that's especially true when you're on a health and wellness journey, because for every health expert out there, they're going to tell you it's all about calories or it's nothing about calories. It's all about chemicals. And so you've just got to pick someone to follow and kind of get into a routine and a rhythm with that, so that you're not having to constantly make adjustments, and you just try what works for you. If you try calorie counting and that didn't work for you, then go to the next plan. So it's not saying that you only follow one person forever, but it's that you just pick an expert, follow what they have to say when you're trying to make adjustments to your stress or your wellness or whatever it is on your health journey. And then if that doesn't work, then choose something else and find out what works best for you. Offset stress with positive activities that you enjoy. So if you don't enjoy running, don't run, right? We hear a lot in the wellness space about, running is the best exercise, and avid runners will tell you that that is the best exercise. But that may not be the best exercise for you. Running is not a positive experience for me. It's not something I enjoy, and I have some health challenges that make it really challenging for me to run. And so that is not going to be a positive calming activity for me, but it might be for many of you. So just like I said, choose what works for you. Remain hopeful and optimistic. And you can do that with the approach I'm going to show you in just a minute. You can plan and prepare for the unexpected. So I think that gives us a sense of control, when we can buy our groceries and, stock some extra toiletries at home and have extra things on hand. So if we're worried about things running out, or we feel like we don't have much control, control what you can control. Fill up your car with gas before it runs out or gets almost to empty. Don't go to the grocery store when you run out of food. Like, have a plan for when you go to the grocery store. So it's really about taking control of the things that are going to help you. For some of you, those may not be stressors. You may need to look at some other things that you can control, but those are some common examples that I see. And for a season of life, that was me. I didn't go and fill up my car with gas until it ran out because I didn't have the time or the money, or, I was, consumed with other things, or I didn't go to the grocery store until my fridge was empty, right? And those are always going to be extra stressors. So if you can kind of plan and prepare in advance and make it a rhythm and routine, then that will help sustain you during stressful times. Clearing the clutter and keeping a tidy space, also very, very important. Take care of your mental and physical needs, practice mindfulness. And that is not the same as meditation. Mindfulness is just being aware of what you're thinking and how you're thinking about something. Focus on your breathing. And sometimes when we get so excited or so stressed out, we don't realize that we're not fully taking deep breaths. And so it's important to really be mindful of that because it impacts our autonomic nervous system. And we can feel stressed if we're just a little out of breath. Stay connected to those that you love. Try to avoid numbing out. We do that with food and alcohol. We do that with social media. There's lots of ways that we can avoid, numbing out, and we can do more things that are helpful. Even exercise can be a way to numb out. So it's not saying that the things that you do to numb out are inherently, quote unquote bad. It just may mean that you need to watch how much you numb out and try to avoid the feelings of stress that you're having. And then I always tell people to ask for help early and often, because a lot of times we will ask for help, but we wait until we're completely overwhelmed, or really there's no one that can help us because we've let the situation get too out of control, or too far gone. And if we ask for help, we may only ask for help once when we're in crisis, but we don't ask for help regularly. And asking for help early and often may keep us out of that crisis mode. Here are some things that you can do to prepare for success. So like I mentioned, our space really reflects how we feel sometimes and vice versa. So clearing out the clutter, getting organized, things like doing a brain download every day. So I actually hadn't planned to show you all this, but I printed this out for myself when I was feeling a little overwhelmed today. If you can see this, this is what I call a to-do matrix. And if anyone's interested in it, I can share it with Miranda. But what I do is for everything that I'm responsible for, it gets a box, and then I write my to-do list or my next actions in that box. So I have them because I'm on faculty for my classes. So I have the classes listed. I have my service organizations listed, upcoming meetings. I have my scholarship projects. I have a place to put, my brainstorm ideas or things that, wow, I wish I had done that this February. Maybe we can do that next February because so many things are calendar based. And so it really helps me in the way that I categorize things because my brain processes things like a bento box. I like to keep things nice and tidy. And sometimes when you do a brain download, I'll do that first in a notebook like here, but then I'll go back and plug them into my matrix so that it's organized. So that when I'm like, okay, I need to work on preparing for this class, then I go to that box and I know exactly what I need to prepare for next versus trying to find it on a really long to-do list. So that might help you. It's been really helpful for me. And that's how you prioritize your task in your to-do list. Look at your calendar and planner often. So we're in March, and I decided over the weekend that I really need a planner that can show me a monthly view and a daily view with times, because I have back-to-back meetings scheduled very often throughout the week. And just having a monthly planner or a weekly planner is not helping me in terms of managing all of those appointments and finding margin, because I tend to try to, be the most efficient. So I'll put things back to back, or sometimes there's just really no other openings or choices. And in the moment on paper, it will look like a really good idea. But then when I'm actually physically having to do it, it doesn't work that well. So I'm actually in March going to get a 2022 planner that shows a monthly and daily view. The good news about that is that I'll have to, get new stickers and fun stuff. I'll make it fun and I'll get it on discount. The not happy news is that I'm probably going to need to plug in some things from my other planners. So having too many planners, too many sources of calendars can be overwhelming. So think about streamlining that as much as you can. I think everyone probably needs their digital calendar in Outlook and maybe on their phone, their regular, app version. But it gets to be too much when you have two digital, two paper, and you're constantly trying to communicate that with your friends and family and colleagues. You're just, sometimes having all that sync together is challenging and costs some time. So think about redoing the system. And y'all, there's no perfect system, and you may have to adjust multiple times, but just find out what works for you. It's really a big research project for you to figure out how that works best. Create deadlines that you know that you need to meet in advance. So if you've got something due to someone tomorrow, then make the due date or the deadline be today, so that if something happens, you've got margin. Have dedicated work time and workspace and a work area for specific things, and that goes in with time blocking your schedule. So assign a day and a time to everything. The things that you schedule are the things that get done. That's why you go to the dentist at a certain time and a certain day, and you get that done more easily than some of the other work and projects, because they don't have a specific day or time. They might have a deadline, but they don't have, blocked out dedicated time for you to do those things. So think about scheduling everything, your fun, your breaks, your grocery store runs, all of the things you want to do and accomplish, even if they're fun things. That will let you enjoy things more and be more spontaneous if you schedule those. Stay connected, like I said, treat yourself, find an accountability buddy. People who come to these calls are probably very like-minded. So if you don't have someone already, maybe reach out to someone, look and see who might be someone to be an accountability buddy with, and take frequent breaks. Like I mentioned, stay motivated and encouraged, and do that by taking action, because motivation is going to come and go, but you're going to build momentum and create motivation when you take action on things. And most importantly, like I said, continue to ask for help. I always put that on every slide, because we need to do more of that. Nurses are especially notorious for not asking for help, because we identify as being the helpers. There are things about seeds of overwhelm. I pulled this from my presentation on overcoming overwhelm, but I think it's difficult to talk about stress without talking about overwhelm, and vice versa. So I'm not going to necessarily go through all of these slides with you, but I wanted you to have access to those. And setting unrealistic expectations of yourself, I think, is really one of the first things to start to look at when you're thinking about managing your stress. Also, managing your perfectionistic tendencies, which usually comes in the form of procrastination, and trying not to be, an overachiever in the sense that that's your sole identity. Having things outside of work and outside of your, personal, like family responsibilities, is so important for you to just be an individual, and not have that be linked to what you produce, not have that be linked to outcomes. And I think we also need to stop glorifying busy. We have that notion of the glorification of busy in our culture. And certainly that is important to be productive and to be a good team member and to make your goals and deadlines and things. But we also want to make sure that we're having some balance. And when I say balance, I don't mean in the traditional sense of the scale is balanced, but more like a balanced budget, where everything is assigned an amount or a time, and not that it's going to be equal. So we're really looking more at work-life harmony versus balance, because things are not always going to be in balance. Sometimes you've got to give more to home. Sometimes you got to give more to work. Sometimes you've got to give more to yourself. And so those are things to think about. Here are some sources of overwhelm. And I know that you know these things, but these are things that sometimes we don't think about. Decision fatigue, uncertainty, comparing ourselves to others is huge, especially with social media. And then, like I said, that hustle culture that we have. So those are some things to think about as well. See if those are sources of overwhelm and stress for you. Symptoms of overwhelm. Again, we've talked about these, but sometimes prolonged stress is really going to lead to that profound overwhelm. So that chronic stress response. And then here's how to stop the overwhelm. Like I said, it goes back to acknowledging it, accepting your feelings, reframing your thoughts, taking breaks, and being present in the moment. So asking what's really important now. How do you win anything? It's by asking what's important now. What do I need to be doing right now? What's the next best step? And then know your resources, ask for help, get an accountability partner, and take action. So here are some other things that you can try. And I put in a ton of resources because for everyone on the call, there's going to be something that resonates with you that may not resonate with another person on the call. So I want to give y'all lots and lots of information so that you can look through this and pick and choose what works, and just experiment, see what works best for you. But movement, water, nutrition, good sleep, and brain breaks, those 5 wellness basics are going to be the place that I always tell you to start. Here's some other practical steps to overcome overwhelm. You want to just focus on becoming 1% better every day. So this is from our habit change talk, and all of these are archives, so y'all can go watch these at your leisure. Do the thing that you dread most first in the morning, and that will help you feel a sense of accomplishment. This is one of the reasons why in the military they have you make your bed in the morning. It's establishing a good habit. It's a first win of the day. This is often why health and wellness people will tell you to exercise first thing in the morning. That's not the best for everyone, but that is why they recommend it. It's the same principle. And this can really help get you motivated and keep you on task when you need some extra external help. So do something that you dread first thing in the morning. It's eat the frog, and that's attributed to Mark Twain. Like I said, what gets scheduled gets done. So here's some other examples and some things that you can do. Your brain likes to process information, but it does not like to store information. So getting it out on paper is really helpful for visual people. If you're not super visual, then having a digital planner is usually pretty helpful too. Set a timer. So here's the Pomodoro method. It's where you actually set a timer for 25 or sometimes 45 minutes and then take a break. So a 5-minute break or a 10 or 15-minute break. And you do that for a cycle of 4 Pomodoros, and then you take a more extended break. So this would be a wonderful way to, have 4 cycles before lunch and then 4 cycles after lunch. And it really does help productivity. This is how I made it through graduate school working full time. And this is something I teach my students. The Pomodoro method just refers to this tomato timer because Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. And apparently tomato timers are really popular in certain parts of the world. It's just your basic kitchen timer, but there are plenty of apps that you can use, or you can just set a timer on your computer or your watch. Like I said, get it out on paper. Remember that you're enough. Repeat some good affirmations. Practice your wellness basics. And then this positive reframing technique is going to be the last thing that I end with. I'll give you the resources that are in the resource toolkit. So again, you can reference all of this, but remember that when you're going to make changes, that your circumstances are rarely something that you can fully control, but you can control your thoughts and feelings and actions and results by making some changes. So your circumstance might be that you're trying to work in the middle of a pandemic, or you're trying to parent in the middle of a pandemic, or in a stressful situation, whatever the circumstance is for you. You're probably going to think, my life is so hard, this is stressful. And then you're going to feel overwhelmed. So what you do in your action is usually nothing. You feel stuck, and so you just don't do anything about it, or you do something that isn't really helpful. And then the result is that your life is actually stressful because you haven't taken action. So if you can retrain your thoughts, you'll notice that the circumstance didn't change. But if you just say, and you all say this if you can, where you are, I am strong, I'm capable, I can change things if I want, you feel more hopeful, even though nothing has changed. And then you do start to get to work. You start to take actions, even if they're baby steps. And then things do start to change because of that small action that you take. And it's recommended that every time you feel something that you're just, you're just not feeling like you have a good mindset around it, you're supposed to journal it out. And then eventually you'll be able to stop journaling out these circumstances, thoughts, feelings, actions, and results. And your brain will start to immediately do that for yourselves. So I really highly recommend it. Sometimes when things are simple, we don't feel like we want to try them because it feels simple or silly. And you're like, that couldn't possibly work. That tomato timer is not going to help me. This positive reframing is going to help me. But if you try it, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how much of an impact it makes. Just doing the Couch to 5K, I signed up at the event on Friday. I had not planned to. I was just going to work the event. And so part of that means I have to walk 11 minutes at a minimum every day. Y'all, just walking 11 minutes and not doing, a really intense workout, I didn't think it was going to make a huge difference. And it's only been 2 days, and it has made a world of difference for me. So again, just because you know something, I always say knowledge does not equal habit change. You can know something to be true. You can even have experienced the good results of it, and you can forget to do it, or you can say that you don't have time. So just know that we all are on the journey toward, finding balance, and that looks different for everyone. So the rest of this is a toolkit of resources, and Miranda has popped that in the chat. And so please download that if you'd like it. If for some reason you can't download it, just send an email and we can get it to you. But these are some things that you can start looking at how to implement from a practical standpoint, some stress and coping techniques. So, and just remember this on the horizon rule, it's just about having something to look forward to. Sometimes we forget that it's important to have something fun on the horizon, and celebrate your wins. All right. Thank y'all so much for the comments in the chat. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. If y'all have any questions, feel free to ask. We just have another minute or so, but I will stay on. One of my favorite quotes that I love from my good friend Julia Madrid, who's a licensed counselor in town, she says, "Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can." It's an Arthur Ashe quote, and I love it. It's a great reminder. These are our social media channels that Ashley and Miranda maintain for the Wellness and Work-Life Office. So we would love for you to connect with us there. If you go to the wellness site, if you do a /webinar, you can see all the archived webinars there. And this is our contact information. Thank you for all of the interaction and engagement in the chat. I appreciate that. Let me know if there was anything that I didn't cover that you were hoping to cover, or if there was anything that you found particularly helpful. Or if you'll have any questions, I'm happy to answer questions. But you're welcome to go if you need to go on to your next appointment. I understand you've been here, so you get your well-being and class credit. Thank you, Brenda. I appreciate that. I always appreciate y'all's feedback. It's important. All right. Well, seeing no questions, I'll go ahead and wrap it for today. Thank y'all so much again for being with us. And remember just to do one thing, to pick one thing I mentioned today, whether it's the timer or whether it's the reframing, or, maybe it's one of the relaxation techniques that I mentioned. Just pick one thing and move from there, take the next step. and celebrate your wins. Celebrate that you carved out an hour to do this work and take care of yourselves. If that can ever be of help, please feel free to reach out. We're so grateful to be a part of your day, and we'll just end with a big roll tide. Thank y'all so much.